আচ্ছা ঠিক আছে ঠিক আছে Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome you all to this evening. I extend my heartiest greetings to you from Alumni Association of Calcutta University Economics Department. You all know that Honorable Finance Minister Mrs. Nirmala Sitharaman has presented the Union Budget for the year 2021-22 in Parliament. In this evening, we will be discussing the budget. We have here three leading economists of the country, Professor Achin Chakraborty, Professor Subrata Sarkar, and Professor Biswajit Dhar. They will be analyzing the budget on behalf of ACWET. I would like to introduce the speakers with the audience. Professor Achin Chakraborty is the Director, Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata. He is a renowned development economist and alumnus of Calcutta University, who did his PhD from the University of California, Riverside. And with him is Professor Subrata Sarkar. Subrata Sarkar is a professor at Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, Mumbai, and RBI Institute. He is also an alumnus of the Department of Economics, University of Calcutta, who did his PhD from the University of Southern California. He is a renowned econometrician and he is an expert in corporate governance. Along with him, we have Professor Biswajit Dhar, who is a professor of the Department of Economics at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is also a student of JNU. He is considered as a leading trade theorist of the country and an expert in WTO studies. We are among us Professor Amio Bagji, teacher of all of us, who will be shortly join with us. And I think he will contribute his important opinion during the course of discussion. Now, with this introduction, I hand over the microphone to Professor Achin Chakraborty, who will moderate today's webinar. So, Achinda, now floor is up to you.
Thank you, Arup. Thank you very much. And I must congratulate the Alumni Association of Calcutta University Economics Department for having organized this webinar on Union Budget and also Economic Survey 2021. As Arup has said, we have two leading economists of the country, Professor Subrata Sarkar of IGIDR and Professor Biswajit Dhar of Jawaharlal Nehru University. Arup has already introduced the speakers, and without much ado, I'll start off the discussion. I would request both Subrata Da and Biswajit Da, let me just explain how we can go about it. Maybe we can start off with first Subrata Da for 15 minutes or so. And then if I feel that, because Arup has given me this license, if I can ask one or two questions, and then Subrata Da would respond to those questions, and then I'd turn to Biswajit Da. And then Biswajit Da again will take 15 minutes and again a couple of questions from me. But so we'll start off with Professor Subrata Sarkar, our Subrata Da. Since Subrata Da's main area of interest so far, it has been corporate sector, corporate governance, and a wide range of issues related to Indian industries. So I would maybe we would expect something from Subrata Da on corporate side of it, and maybe some macro issues as well. But it's up to you, Subrata Da. So whatever way you organize your presentation, it's fine with us. But if something I feel that maybe we'd like to know something from you, so at the end of your 15 minutes, I'd ask one or two questions. Okay. So now floor is
sure, yes.
okay. So Subrata Da, it's now your turn.
Okay, good evening, and thank you so much for inviting me to speak in this webinar. It's always nice to see known faces. COVID may be bad in many aspects, but COVID is good in one respect. That means you can actually meet people from all around the world, on the same screen and get to see people whom you otherwise would have seen only once in a year or maybe twice in a year. So that way, COVID is good in some sense. So let me just give a little bit. I am no expert. Let me tell. I am not a big expert on budgets, but I do follow budgets. I do follow budgets, and the budget is a annual event. I mean, we should not think that budget is once for all and once for all an event, because I mean, in budget people announce certain intentions, but it is very important that those intentions are never executed. It appears that I allocated so many lakh crores today for certain sectors doesn't mean that it gets spent on that very day, because it will get spent over years and years and years. And therefore budget is just gives a direction of the intent of the government, and its readiness to to be its readiness to straightforwardly proceed with many multiple reforms that happens all over the year towards that goal. So in that sense, we should look at the budget. This is not the budget is one time fixed all event. It's a dynamic concept in some sense. Now, going by this budget of this year, I mean, as we economists tend to think, I mean, I have some view, and Achin has some view, Arup has some view, everybody has some view, but at the end of the day, the views of everyone probably gets very well aggregated in the stock market. In the stock market, in the sense that different people have different expectations, and then finally the sum of that expectations is reflected in the stock market. So by going by that indicator, it appears that this budget is good, in the sense that this is historically since the 1990s. This is the single point one day gain in the Sensex. It gained about 2,500 points, starting from the morning when Nirmala Sitharaman started her speech, and by the time she has ended, the market has returned to the bloodbath it saw 4 days earlier. So I mean, much of that 3,400 Sensex point loss has been recovered. I mean, two-thirds have been recovered by today's budget. So what is so good about this budget? The work so good in the sense that it is professedly good. So one part is that it builds on three things. One is the infrastructure, one builds on agricultural credit, and it also builds on agricultural credit, and it also builds on rural economy. Three things that we think are very important. Remember, this budget is happening at a time when we are not we as only in India, but everywhere in the world, we are faced with this pandemic situation, which reduced the world growth rate of all economies. I mean, most economies have contraction. India also has a huge amount of contraction during the COVID period. Probably one of the largest contraction that is happening in an emerging economy is India. So in that light, the budget also has budget has limited headroom, to somehow navigate as far as resources are concerned. Just 1 minute. So one part has significant less headroom. But compared to that, in that extent, we have learned from macro I mean, very early in the macro that y equal to c plus I plus g. That means whenever our economy is in doldrums, like we have to increase either c or I or g. Now consumption increase, till now India has been following a consumption led growth path, but right now in the pandemic the consumption growth path appears to be a little bit less promising as a avenue of growth. So investment and G, which is government expenditure, has to go up, and it is very nice to see that in the fiscal year, the current fiscal 21. So, current fiscal year 2021, the fiscal deficit is pegged at 9.5%, which is a significantly high than our traditional 4.5% GDP deficit. And in the next fiscal, which is FY22, the fiscal deficit is pegged at to be 6.8, and then it's progressively supposed to return to our usual level of 4.5 by FY26. So which means is the government is trying to give a signal that in the faced with the pandemic, that it will not be clubbered to be held, that there will be to rely on the fiscal deficit as the target, and not undertake government expenditure. So government seems to be taking a sort of a pro-Keynesian path by trying to increase government expenditure. So three things that stands out of the budget is: one is a significantly high amount of capex, which is 5.5 lakh crores, and which is an increase of about 34%, 34.5% from the last fiscal year. So that's a huge increase in capex, about 34%. The biggest increase also is coming in the health sector, is a 137% increase, we had an outlay of 2.23 lakh crores. So that is a large great increase. And finally, the increase in agricultural credit, which is pegged at some 16.5 lakh crores. So we automatically think, and so with this we expect a sufficient increase in government expenditure. Which is an attempt to pull the economy out of the doldrums. Of course, people say that 11.3%, 11.5% growth rate in fiscal 22, but that is mostly because of a base effect that you see, that because we have contracted by 10, maybe 7%. So going at 12, 11% is not a big deal. But with sustained government expenditure, the economy may come back to the pre-COVID level, maybe in 2 to 3 years. If there is a government expenditure on capex, especially in capex in infrastructure projects, is very high, then we expect a trickle down multiplier effect to occur, and then we expect those incomes that occur through infrastructure projects would kickstart certain industries. So the industry is generally gung ho that if the industry seem to like this budget, that if government expenditure actually increases that much to 5.54 lakh crores, then there should be having a multiplier effect, and industries themselves will see a kickstart in their demand as those infrastructure spendings, translate to higher incomes in the hand of people, and when those people spend the money, the industrial demand is supposed to increase. A very other thing about the infrastructure project is the allocation towards the railways and the road networks. So significant amount has been kept towards about 1.1 lakh crore for modernization of railways. So and of which 1.07 lakh crore is for capital expenditure. So this is likely to have a great effect on the economy, and hopefully through a multiplier effect, we would see that the economy is out of the doldrums slowly but steadily. Now the question is, where does the government give the money from? I mean, it is always easy to announce projects, but there needs to be money enough in the hands of the government to make the spending. But remember, at 9.5% fiscal deficit, the debt servicing ratio is about 82%. So therefore, the government doesn't have enough money to spend on this project. So the two things which is very, very critical in the hands of the government is the following: is like the divestment target, which is 1.75 lakh crores. In the last fiscal, they attempted a divestment of 2.1 lakh crore, which they could not raise, which they could not meet. Of course, that time the COVID struck, so therefore that was a different scenario. But in the coming fiscal, the divestment target is 1.75 lakh crores, so that is a source of revenue. Number two, they want to asset monetization in terms of setting up their land, selling of lands which government holds, lands in prime locations. So that is number one. And of course, third is the amount of borrowing. The government is supposed to borrow 80,000 crores over the years. So the government seems to be not so very worried about their fiscal deficit. The government seems to willing to bite the bullet and spend in the proverbial Keynesian method of just increasing G to take the economy out. Now, a great one very significant thing in the budget is the creation of the development financial institutions, because earlier we had all these, we had this IDBI, we had this ICI, which used to do long-term infrastructure sort of spending, and they are long-term lenders. So right, but over the years, these banks, these institutions have become like banks, and therefore they are reluctant to take long-term leverage. They are long-term lending. They are normally very reluctant. But this creation of the development financial institution is a very great step, because in this budget 20,000 crores have been allocated for the creation of these development financial institutions, and it is targeted that by the next 3 years they have 5 lakh crores to lend. So if this happens, then that would be a great thing. A little bit of disappointment, because you cannot have good of everything. I mean, this is the basic tenet of economics, that I mean, almost all curves are downward sloping. If you have to have good things, then you have to have some bad things too. So one of the probably a little bit of let down is in the sense of there is no change in the direct taxes. As an average middle class person like me, I was expecting some income tax slabs to be changed, especially that in the last, the government has frozen your DA and everything for the last 1 year, and it's not going to change for the next another year. So we are expecting some change in direct taxes. That has not happened. However, in direct taxes, the only good thing that has happened, and the filing process and compliance levels, they are trying to make it more simplified. So that's the bad news for, no reduction and nothing, no increase in the, or decrease in the slabs is a little bit bad news for the average middle class person. And the other thing is that to finance all this agriculture credit, the agriculture credit is pegged at 16.5 lakh crores. Now, there is a cess, an educational cess and agricultural cess of 2.5 rupees for petrol, 2.5 rupees for petrol, and 4 rupees for diesel. That's a pretty large amount. I mean, of course, so you understand the constraint of the government, that it has to have some amount of money to spend. But whether this cess on petrol and diesel, how they will play out in the long run for inflation, is something to be seen. But I guess to spend, government needs resources, so therefore it cannot make everybody happy. So this says, because petrol prices and diesel prices in India are much higher compared to that can be justified by the price of the crude. But in these trying times, possibly this is the only option. And finally, I want to say something, that budget is, as I said in the beginning, budget is just a sort of a budget is a sort of an event that you announce, is an intention, and you have to be steadfast in that intention of carrying out whatever you said. So the challenge would be to, the LIC IPO should be able to fetch that money. Government wants to sell LIC, at least some part of a share, and then therefore that LIC share, that LIC IPO should be coming soon. It should be subscribed so that the government is going to get money. Then all these other asset monetization that the government wants to do, and divestment that the government wants to do of 1.75 lakh crore, that should materialize. Economy should, it is still a sort of a supply, the budget is still a supply side, is still following a supply side, but a long-term growth sort of an idea. That means it wants to invest in infrastructure projects. So remember, when you invest in infrastructure projects, the benefits of that infrastructure project takes time to, takes time to materialize. So therefore, the budget intention is good, but quick recovery of hitting the non-COVID level very quickly is unlikely. But it is a long haul, and hopefully the government will stick to its intentions, and maybe we'll see brighter days much quicker than we currently think about. So for the first round, I have all this to say. Achin, you are mute.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Subrata. So maybe we'll come back to you after Biswajit's presentation. So Biswajit, of course, I mean, Subrata said that by and large he liked the budget, but there are some good sides, there are some bad sides. And the good side is that Subrata thinks that it's a Keynesian budget by and large, and because the government is ready to carry a high fiscal deficit, and but he is doubtful about the budgetary estimates and the actuals. So because last couple of years we have seen that the actuals fall far short of the budgetary estimates. So ultimately, how much the government ends up spending on these things, including healthcare, which is 137% in healthcare. And so we are not sure, at the end of the year, how much the government would be able to spend. So given the trend that actual falls far short of the estimates, so maybe we can apprehend some of these gaps between actual and estimates. So Biswajit, I would request you to focus on the issues that you think that they're extremely important, given that we already had this economic survey that 2 days ago. And so economic survey in fact talks about the economy as a whole, and also sectoral in detail. But in that context, how do you look at the budget? So please go ahead. Yes.
Thank you, Achin. It's a pleasure to be here, and I must thank the Alumni Association for inviting me and sharing my thoughts on the budget. Let me begin by saying that I agree with Professor Sarkar's view that budget is part of a process. Yeah, it's not a one-time event. But it's a very important part of the process, and especially because in the context that we are in today, because we don't have a planning process where the planning commission used to come and give us a sense of direction in which the economy would go. So budget has now become the only sort of mechanism, or only event in a way we can say, where through which we can see the direction in which the government wants to take the economy. So from that point of view, it is extremely important, and we need to understand where the budget is going. Now, again, I would agree with Professor Sarkar when he says that these are unprecedented times. But the important thing that one needs to recognize, and something that the economic survey and I think the finance minister, both of them underplayed, is that the Indian economy has been in the throes of a downturn even before the COVID times. If you look at the quarter-wise GDP numbers, for 9 quarters continuously, Indian, the GDP, the growth actually had fallen, quarter after quarter. And then we ended up with a 3.1% growth in the fourth quarter of 2019-20. So the point that I'm trying to make here is that it's not a COVID-induced crisis that we are talking about. There's a structural problem that the Indian economy has been facing. And I think it is important for the government to recognize it. It did recognize it in the last budget. And this time it's only talking about the COVID, kind of the context is only COVID. But it had to look way beyond that. And therefore, I think that, the solutions do not really, so if you don't make my point is that if you don't make the correct diagnosis, of course, you will not get the right kind of medicine. And the solutions that have been provided, I think, that's where I, slightly disagree with Professor Sarkar. And I don't see that, you get the solutions for the kind of ailments that the Indian economy is faced with today. We have been speaking for a long time that there is a severe demand crunch that the economy is facing, and there were telltale numbers out there in terms of the labor market numbers were coming thick and fast, and what the COVID crisis has done is that it has exacerbated this problem of demand beyond anything that we can ever think of. So if you have a labor force participation rate which is below 40%, then I think it's a very serious matter. And so the problem is that unless you can stimulate demand, and we have seen this because corporates were given tax exemptions in 2018, and or was it 2019? Sorry, 2019. But nothing of that got translated in terms of higher investment which the government was expecting, because the demand was completely flat. So here I would say that there was this crying need to stimulate demand and create more jobs, because without this the economy doesn't go anywhere. You can have any kind of investment, infrastructure investment, but at the end of the day the corporates will think in terms of the market which is there. So if the market is not there, you may put up all kinds of infrastructure, but if the goods don't sell, then nothing happens. And here I think it's a case of a missed opportunity, because see, when I looked at the numbers, for instance, one of the things that is now very important to do is to spend via Narega, yeah. And given the kind of problems that the migrants faced, and they're returning to their villages, it was very important that spending on Narega was stepped up. In fact, the revised estimates show that they have been stepped up, and which is actually good news that they did it. I don't know whether it is sufficient, because we still don't have adequate evidence to that effect. That we still don't have numbers from the government as to how large was the population of the migrants which actually went back. There was a parliament question which said 1 crore people actually went back, but I think it's much more than that. But in any case, so the spending was increased during a pandemic. So the revised estimates show a large increase in Narega, but unfortunately, in the budget proposals, Narega expenditure not pulled down, and I think that's a cause of concern, because there could have been an opportunity for the government to do two things by keeping Narega spending at that level at which they had taken it up in the revised estimates, or go even further up, because all the infrastructure that has been talked about, the big announcements are these big infrastructure which would help the organized sector, the manufacturing sector, and maybe the services sector, and these are big ticket investments. But what happens about rural infrastructure? Rural infrastructure, we all know, is completely gone. Successive governments have neglected this particular sector, and I think Narega could have been used. Narega funding could have been used to beef up the rural infrastructure supporting agriculture. And much of the problems that we are seeing through the farmer agitations and the crisis in agriculture, there could have been a step towards addressing those because efficiency on farm efficiency, we're doing some study, is really rock bottom today, and is really problematic, because if almost 60% of the workforce is in that kind of a shape, and I don't think the Indian economy can really do well in a sustained manner over a period of time. So that's the first issue that I'll flag, that they have not been done adequately. The second, an indirect impulse, and again providing certain amount of stimulus to demand, again to the large number of disadvantaged people that we need to really think about, is spending on the National Food Security Act, the PDS. Again, the same trend we have seen, from the government, step up of spending on NFSA during the pandemic, and a sharp decline now in the budget proposals. And I don't understand why, because this country has the largest number of undernourished people. I know in the world global hunger index, out of 107 countries reviewed last year, India's rank was 94. And the government, the finance minister has announced in the budget that massive amounts have been spent on procurement this year. And I was doing some rough calculation. It's in excess of 200,000 crores, 2 lakh crores that have been spent on procuring wheat and rice alone. Yeah. Now, if that is the kind of stock holding that the government has, you better spend it on people who have lost their jobs and who have actually been marginalized, so that at least they have something to fall on. At least they don't go hungry. But again, that is not the way the government is thinking of doing. So my point is here that today C is really the critical variable in the national income identity, and that can make or break the Indian economy. But we haven't got given adequate attention to this. The third factor that is that I found, I'm actually pointing out the missed opportunities. Let me put it this way. The third factor is really on the health issues. Of course, Professor Sarkar said that there's been a step up of investment or spending on health. But if you look at some of these numbers, these are actually for a number of years. There is some 64,000 crores in over 5 years. But what happens in the immediate? The immediate problem is that if we have to have a vaccine rollout the way the government is desiring to, and which is what is required to get the Indian economy back on track, you need to ensure that the vaccine reaches the last person. And how do you do that? You can only do that through improved access and affordability, and that can only happen if there is a huge intervention by the public sector. So we have been again talking about this for a number of years, that the public health infrastructure needs to be improved. And if you look at the spending of countries on stimulus packages right across the world, there's been a singular emphasis on improving the health infrastructure. But if I look at the budget today now, and the spending on by the ministries, health ministries, both in terms of the health ministry, in terms of where there is the spending on infrastructure, there's a decline in infrastructure, and quite a bit of decline, and also in health research. So here we are in a country where we have actually prided ourselves by saying that we have got vaccines out in a very quick time. We have got an Indian vaccine out. So I think one way to recognize this achievement was to increase the government spending on health research, and this is happening around the world. Most of the vaccines that are out there, which are being used, including us, AstraZeneca, that had huge government funding, and that is how it has become a reality. And government of India should have done that. So that is the thing. That's and finally, a word about resource mobilization. The point that I'm important point to realize is that there is again, resource mobilization has to be done on a sustained basis for the government to give directions. And why am I saying this? This is because the IMF is now coming around and saying, yes, fiscal policy is the best way to get economies out of crisis. And IMF, the fiscal conservative par excellence, is actually saying this, and he's also saying that public sector, state-owned enterprises are delivering in developed countries, and from the downturn in 2008, and there is a lesson there. But I think we have gone the other way around. Here we are finding that we are trying to sell off our our family silver. I of course would like to be educated on this. That what does the government get out of selling off LIC? LIC, you could have actually you have a handle on small savings there. You could actually uh, use it for financing your projects that you have. What is the point of doing this? On the other hand, I find very little effort being made at resource mobilization, but but there is continued emphasis. Although the government was saying that we would cut down on the kind of incentives and kind of handouts that they were giving to all kinds of entities, especially the corporates. But now all these tax exemptions have actually been blown up. Now, I think it is high time that the government actually does a serious analysis of what has been the outcome of giving these handouts, these tax breaks to the corporates. I can say I've been looking a lot at the export side, export incentives. Export incentives. If you look at export incentives that the government has doled out and the export performance, it's a sorry kind of a situation. Exports have been dipping. Export incentives have gone up, and a similar thing could actually happen elsewhere. Like for instance, I mentioned at the beginning that the corporates were given reduced corporate taxes were offered to them so that they bring in more investment in the economy. That never happened. So I think that selling family silver is not a sustained way of financing the government's aspirations. And again, I think we are walking down a completely wrong pathway. There was a need to tax those entities or those who are capable of who can afford a higher tax rate. And let me say finally, I was actually, for my own interest, I was looking at the budgets that were presented at times, in the immediate aftermath of a war or a financial or economic crisis. I looked at 4 budgets, and in each of the budgets, I was very surprised. Even Manmohan Singh's budget of 1991 had a lot of resources coming from taxation on luxury goods. Yeah, and I think there was Nirmala Sitharaman could have can actually take some lessons from the past budgets to see how she can get her resource mobilization side right. Otherwise, I don't think this economy can be pulled up by its bootstraps. Thank you very much. I think I took longer than I should have. I'm sorry for that.
Thank you very much, Biswajit. And now we have two distinctly different views, I would say. Subrata was kind of optimistic about the fallout of this year's budget, and Biswajit has put a very critical view on that. And particularly one question which I think I would address to both of you. We have heard, Biswajit, that this corporate tax break has brought very little in terms of investment. And the main problem is demand deficiency. And the demand deficiency has not been, it cannot be cured just by corporate tax break. But anyway, in this budget, there is no explicit tax break as such. But as Biswajit pointed out, it was already done in 2019, September, to be precise. So September 2019, we had the corporate reduction. And after that, we haven't seen much in terms of, turnaround in the economy, because it's, as Biswajit pointed out, we had these 4 quarters of declining growth rates in the past year, in the year before. And so it is a legacy of that, demand contraction, and as a result of declining growth rates. And that legacy actually, then we have COVID. So it's a combination of those factors which actually brought us here. And now to get out of that, according to Biswajit, it's not enough. what the government is trying to do. So that's why he calls it missed opportunity. And so government could have done that, and but government is has not done it. So the government has missed the opportunity. The last point I think that what Biswajit has made, it's extremely important. That is the resource mobilization part is excessive reliance. There's a divestment part, and divestment we know that it is, and which Subrata has already mentioned that in the last year, in fact, we didn't get much out of this divestment. But even though we didn't get much out of that, but still we are relying on that instead of trying to tap some other sources of revenue, and that is something which is puzzling. And as Biswajit has rightly pointed out, that probably the finance minister could have looked at the earlier efforts how to mobilize more resources, and which is again a missed opportunity. So in terms of this corporate, particularly this question, so what do you think, Subrata, that about the pessimism of Biswajit, that corporate giving incentives to corporates actually don't bring in much? So how do you respond to that? So let's start with that question. Yes. Yeah, Subrata, unmute your microphone. Subrata, unmute. Yes.
Yeah, let me first say that I also agree with what Professor Dhar has said, because that is the challenge of the budget. That means you cannot do good of everything. So while I was also a little bit positive in tone, that does not mean that I was always supportive of every other thing that the government did. Of course, one thing that happened is, as you are rightly saying, that I'll come to the missed opportunity. It is one thing is of course true that our economy has some structural problems. So now COVID is just a savior for the government, because if the COVID, assuming that COVID had not happened, our economy was in doldrums. I mean, pre-COVID also our economy was falling and falling and falling, which Professor Thor rightly is pointed out. So, which suggests that it will be no good if we try to camouflage everything under the COVID guise, that all our ailments are due to COVID. Our ailments are not only due to COVID. COVID only exacerbated. But as Professor Dhar just pointed out, that we have been falling growth rates much before COVID, and that has nothing to. And actually, the industry, that tax break that the industry got was because of sheer lobbying, that reduce our tax rate so that we can invest in projects. But those invest in projects, and that project investment in the projects will finally lead to income. There was a big debate at that time that why Nirmala Sitharaman even gave that tax break to the industry. So one of the big reasons she gave was not only that to give incentive to our industry to pull them up from whatever rock bottom they are going, but also to change the relative tax rates between all other Asian countries, because our corporate tax is generally higher than the neighboring countries in Taiwan, China, and all those things. So all those other countries. So therefore, the tax break was given, thinking that not only it will help Indian industries, but also other industries from other countries going to relocate. So now, and so that is the logic by which that particular investment break was given. Unfortunately, COVID struck. Now, after COVID struck, and some focus shifted to China, that and people realize that it may not be a good idea to locate all your plants in one country, and maybe it's a good idea to diversify your location. So I think that if India government keeps on spending on infrastructure projects, simplifies its rules and regulations and its approval processes, then maybe some industries from other countries are going to shift, and that may have a positive effect on demand. But I do agree with Professor Dhar that that India, because of the pandemic, many millions of people has lost jobs. So perhaps the finance minister would have increased the spending under Nariega, and then distributed the food stocks, but they are not doing it, because I think they would like the states to buy those stocks, buy those stocks and then distribute distribute them to the citizens or the poor people so that they get some revenue. So, yes, the tax break did not fortify into investments from the corporate sector, but hopefully with government now spending up and spending up its capex and capex, I hope that there will be sufficient demand generated. Because one quick way to generate demand was to reduce the direct taxes, but that many people have been saying for a long time. But there are other points of view which say that lifting up an economy from the doldrums by reducing direct tax also doesn't work, because if you reduce direct tax, it gives purchasing power in the hand of the consumers very quickly. That is true, but in the long run, we all know that if some expenditure is financed through lower of tax, then some other day the taxes will increase in the future. So maybe it is very difficult choice that if you want to have a sustained long run growth, then that demand has to come through investment rather through consumption. That is what I think.
Thank you, Subrata. So I think we are gradually moving towards the end of this because we have used up much of the time. So I would now come to about one particular issue about resource mobilization. This reliance on cess rather than taxes. Now, reliance on cess rather than taxes, that is something which is heavily criticized by all the finance commissions, at least the recent finance commissions, that, because if you collect revenue through cess, that means that you are bypassing finance commission's mandate about this center to state devolution. So this devolution thing, actually, you can completely bypass, and you can, again, it's a kind of centralization. In terms of resource mobilization, if you rely on cess rather than taxes, because taxes are to be devolved according to finance commission mandates. So this is one way of bypassing that thing as far as the center is concerned. So what do you think about this, Biswajit?
Yes, I didn't have the time to dwell on that. You're absolutely correct, because this is a major issue that has been raised, and again it has come up because of the agricultural cess. Now, let me also point out a little thing here. I was looking at the the actual accounts from the Controller General of Accounts website yesterday, and which is startling to see that the increase in union excise duty on account of the hike in petroleum duties. These are all union excise duty, remember, huh? Yeah. And the every other tax had declined. Every other component of the tax revenues have declined other than that. And there is an increase of, I think, if I'm not mistaken, something about 84,000 crores on account of union excise duties. So again, the same thing is happening today. The additional resource mobilization by the the government is doing is via an instrument which is giving it putting all the money in its own coffers, not in the divisible pool. Yeah, and so this could be a problem, so I don't think that's the right way to go. And also, on top of everything else, if you look at the devolution, the numbers on devolution, these are really bad. And every state government has been talking about it. The opposition ruled states have been talking about the fact that the central government is not fulfilling its commitment under the Finance Commission. So I think it is, this is not the right way, and particularly from from the government, which is talking about cooperative federalism. That's not really thing to be done, actually.
Yeah. Thank you, Biswajit. We have with us Professor Amio Bakshi, and So, sir, if you would like to add something, would you like to say your observations? Would you like to share with us? Yeah.
Am I audible?
Yes. Yes. Now, yes. Please.
Well, I agree almost entirely with Biswajit. I only want to add that, first of all, India is one of the least taxed countries in the world. The marginal tax rate for the richest is the same as that for Achin, Chakraborty, Sarkar, or Biswajit Dhar. Now, India admires greatly the United States, 51.8%. I don't see why India should not raise a tax rate for the rich from 100,000 and that would give us an enormous amount of money in the government coffers. In fact, if we also, because of the COVID, we impose a one-time tax on the wealthiest, as Argentina, which is not the most radical country in the world, has just done, then we'd get several lakhs of crores of rupees into the government coffers. And the government has an enormous amount of stock in its godowns, and there is no reason why it should not introduce a universal public distribution system, as is there in Kerala and one or two other southern states. And that would at once raise the nutritional levels of the people and also make unnecessary much of the has to incur. And the selling of LIC is, I think, one of the most irresponsible things that I can think of, because in all countries, including the United States, private insurance companies have always failed the people who have insured them. Think of the air stressor. And we nationalized insurance because this was done by the private insurance companies earlier on, and LIC has served the hundreds of millions of Indian people that it has come into existence. That is all that I want to say.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you for your very sharp comments on the issues that already Biswajit has already raised some of these issues about LIC and divestment, and I don't know whether we can take questions because people have joined through YouTube, so I don't think that we can take questions further. So anyway, thank you very much, and we have this very lively kind of discussion, particularly because Subrata and Biswajit they didn't agree entirely. So that actually made it all the more illuminating, I would say, and it was extremely illuminating because Subrata took slightly position in favor in a kind of optimistic position as far as the budget goes, and Biswajit took a larger view and saying that it actually the problem started even much before the pandemic, and this is not the right kind of medicine that we see from the budget. So with this, and thank you very much, and I think we are right on time. And thank you, Subrata, thank you, Biswajit, for joining us. And now, thank you. Now, I think our Alumni Association will have something to say. Arup? Unmute your mic, Arup.
Hello.
Yes.
Thank you, Achinda. Thank you, Achinda. Thank you, Subrata and Biswajit and our teacher, Omyo Babu. And now I invite Professor Sudokshina Gupta, Professor, Department of Economics, University of Calcutta, and also the Vice President of ACWED, to deliver vote of thanks on behalf of ACWED. Sudokina.
Well, thank you, Arubda. So we have come to the end of a very lively discussion on budget, annual budget 2021-22. And the deliberation has been very lively and very illuminating, as Achinda was saying. I profusely thank the speakers and the moderator for making it so attractive, with all the positive and negative points of the present budget, the current budget being highlighted with such a lively discussion. Professor Biswajit Dhar, who is a professor, Department of Economics, Jawaharlal Nehru University, is most sincerely thanked for his wonderful lecture. And Professor Subrata Sarkar, Professor, Indira Gandhi Institute of Development Research, and an alumnus of our dear Katakol, is thanked most warmly for such nice discussion. I also thank Professor Achin Chakraborty, Director, Institute of Development Studies, Kolkata, and another alumnus of our own Katakol, utmost sincerely for moderating it so nicely and for putting in his own comments. Professor Romeo Bakchi, the most renowned professor and such a senior professor who also joined the deliberations with his comments, and is thanked profusely and most sincerely on behalf of ACUIT. The speakers and the moderator are especially thanked for finding time for us. They are all very busy persons, as we all know. And the viewers and the listeners are also thanked for being there. And they are especially thanked with regards for taking interest in the program. And Dr. Nilanjan Patro, who's been behind the streaming of this program, is also thanked. And last but not the least, I thank ACUID, of which I'm also a part, for organizing the program. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sudokina. So with this, we end the program. And we thank all the speakers and the moderator for joining us in this lively session of analyzing the union budget, which is a very illuminating and very entertaining session. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.